Hey, what's going on, everybody? So this is actually going to be hopefully more of a quick video. It's just something that kind of popped into my brain. It's actually about Andrew Bustamante. Uh, um, he's a ex-CIA member, um, and he's kind of really selling his company, Everyday Spy. First off, wish him the best. I'm not here to be a hater or anything like that. I don't necessarily think he's like a horrible person or anything. Uh, wouldn't necessarily say I agree with him 100% on everything, but then again, he has certain experiences and that I've never gone through. So I value what he has to offer and share. Um, but Andrew Bustamante is very interesting because he attended the Air Force Academy in like the late 90s or something like that, right? And then later end up joining the CIA. And then now is kind of in, his own private business, kind of doing kind of more like intelligence consulting, things of that nature, right? He's like a one man Booz Allen Hamilton or whatever type organization, and he's been very prominent on the YouTube circuit, kind of going on Lex Friedman, Andrew Scholes. Sometimes, a lot of these type of podcasts, right? Sean Ryan. So he knows the market, where to go. He knows, I think, the demographics of YouTube, probably being very analytical minded. It's typically more male oriented, probably ages out anywhere between 14 to 34, predisposition to things like UFC, military stuff, edge lord jokes, conspiracy theories, historical documentaries, all that type of stuff, right? But regardless, one thing I notice about Andrew when he does a lot of these interviews is that he likes to talk about affirmative action. He almost makes it seem as if his existence in some of these spaces was kind of because of affirmative action. And I would kind of refute that stance. And myself being, a black American, and he being, I want to say, of Hispanic a heritage or whatnot. I believe he's of Mexican descent, from what I've heard him say, is that sometimes, particularly for me, having grown up in, let's just say, a lot of majority white spaces, right? And I'm sure the same thing was for him, right? He talks about how he grew up in kind of rural Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania can be pretty country. I think a lot of people forget that. There's some parts of Pennsylvania that seem more south than the south, and there's racism there. I mean, it can be a pretty gnarly place, skinheads, stuff like that, right? But so I think there's kind of a little bit of similarities between kind of like our existences, right? Kind of, being the person of color in predominantly white spaces. But I noticed that Andrew likes to talk about affirmative action, typically in the earlier parts of interviews in which people are talking about his background. And I think that is a subjective statement he makes. In other words, he likes to talk about how affirmative action got him into the military academy. And I think to myself, unless you somehow hacked into everybody's like application and resume and report card and did a line by line analysis proving that you were the affirmative action hire, why would you say that about yourself unless you're trying to engender yourself with your target audience by kind of having this self-depreciating, almost coming in with a little bit of head bowed humility in order to kind of slip into your audience by disarming them, knowing that they're majority, let's just be real, probably your white, college age, late 20s, Joe Rogan watchers, things of that nature, right? So you're trying to engender a sense of sympathy, so you don't necessarily seem like the cocky, arrogant person of color over talking these, let's be real, your predominantly white male audience, who may not admit that what they care about or something, but then again, some might, whether they're conscious of that or not. So I just think it's very interesting. He always talks about affirmative action, and like I said, unless he literally knew that he was the affirmative action hire, how do you not know that you're the most qualified person to be there? Why would you not? why would you not be confident in your abilities? From what I hear is, you're a pretty, outstanding young man. You got good grades in school. You abstain from drug use, things of that nature. So what makes you think just because you have a bronze skin tone that somehow you're the exception to the rule? Maybe the affirmative action hires was Johnny whatever, whose parents, knew Senator so and so and got them in. You know what I'm saying? And that's what it is. It's like it kind of seems that, and I'm not sure if I'm not even sure if Andrew's aware of this, being analytical minded as in kind of very headstrong in his views. I would say he's probably is a little conscious of it, but I think it's something that we as minority people do. Incidentally, sometimes we self-depreciate ourselves in order to not ruffle the feathers of the majority. Essentially, we self-depreciate to maintain their appreciated value, essentially, so we can, essentially not be targeted, not be looked down upon, not be shunned, be included within friend groups, etc. Right? And I can admit this, and I'm not saying that this is like how I act around, majority white people like all the time or something, but particularly like in certain cases in my youth, looking back as an older person, sometimes you just kind of learn that game, that social game, you know, uh, in how to acclimate to different environments, particularly for myself coming from not a military brat background in which my dad was in the army, and I've lived in all different sorts of places. Some places where the school may have been 60% black and everything else. Other places, it may have been 98% white. Some other places were so diverse, you just didn't really care. It was just all just a melting pot. You know what I'm saying? So I've been in different environments, and it's just interesting that he talks about affirmative action. I'll play a clip here for you, but I'm thinking to myself, what makes you not think that you weren't the most qualified person to have been there? Unless you're just trying to knock yourself down a peg to engender yourself to your audience. And from a person who is in the intelligence agencies who makes all these videos about human nature and psychology, yada yada, whatever, it makes me think that you must know what you're doing. So let me just play a clip here for you.
About 16 and a half, 17 years old, I was like, man, I got to figure something out. And that was when I realized there's this thing called service academies. I had a good GPA in high school, and I didn't realize how positive affirmative action was on my side at the time because it was 1996 or whatever, whenever I made the decision. And that's why I just started applying to the military academies: West Point, Naval Academy, Coast Guard Academy, Air Force Academy, and then Air Force Academy got back to me. And that was when I was like, yep, let's go do the thing because I'm getting the hell out of here and I'm not staying with my parents.
Nope.
Yeah.
And what are some of the requirements or tests that they put you through for you to be, the pilot?
Yeah. So to get into the Air Force Academy, I had to go through like a physical exam. My grades had to be assessed. I had to get sponsorship from a congressperson or a senator.
Really?
Yeah. So that's really where things got kind of hinky for me because anybody can write a report. Anybody can write an essay. Anybody can talk about, why they would sacrifice their life to protect their country and write about American freedom. But it's totally different when you've got, 200 people in the state trying to get 2 spots from one senator. And that's where I found myself. So I got lucky, man. I was a busboy in a golf, like a golf club, not a cafe. What are those things called? Like a
diner?
Yeah,
like a diner.
Like
they don't even have many.
Like a restaurant at a golf club.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that the congressperson for our district played golf on that golf course.
Oh, the clubhouse, right?
The clubhouse, yeah. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
So then the general manager for the clubhouse was like, hey, you're trying to get into one of the academies, and don't you need a congressperson? I was like, yeah, I don't know how to do that. And he was like, well, he's eating lunch right over there. Why don't you just go say hello? So that was literally how it started. And I went over there and introduced myself, looking and smelling like recycled food. Anybody who's worked in the restaurant business knows exactly what I'm talking about. That smell, that greasy, weird
My
food
grandparents
smell.
had a restaurant, and when they would come over, I mean, you could smell them for days. It never left their pores. I don't think.
Yep. So, shook hands, gave high fives, and then, 6, 8 weeks, 10 weeks later, the guy sees me a few times. He's like, are you still trying to get in? Are you still going to make it? And I was like, yeah, I'm trying. And I just got accepted to this thing, and I just submitted my report for that. And eventually he was like, well, why don't you talk to my secretary and let's see if we can't get you in for an interview. And then I got the interview and I got the sponsorship. So it worked out well.
Now, going in, do they torture you at all to get into the Air Force?
Yeah, the Air Force Academy has what's called a plebe year. It's a zoomy year for us, a plebe year for the Naval Academy.
That just sounds bad.
Yeah, and
right?
it's a year of pain.
Give me an example. Give me a couple of things that they did to you.
So you got
his face. He's thinking he's
I'm
like,
reliving it, man. So you're 18.
Look, he's looking away.
It's a zoomy year for us, a plebe year for the Naval Academy.
That just sounds bad.
Yeah, and
right?
it's a year of pain.
Give me an example. Give me a couple of things that they did to you.
So you got, the Air Force Academy has what's called a plebe year. It worked out well.
Now, going in, do they torture you at all?
Interview, and I got the sponsorship, so I went for an interview, and then report for that, and eventually he was like, "Are you still going to make it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm trying." And I just 6, 8 weeks, 10 weeks later,
pores. I don't.
Yep. So shook hands, gave high fives.
When they would come over, I mean, you could smell them for days. It never left their pores. I don't.
Yep. Greasy, weird.
My grandparents
food smell. Like recycled food. Anybody who's worked in the restaurant. And I went over there and introduced myself, looking and smelling lunch right over there. Why don't you just go say hello? So that was literally how it started. Get into one of the academies, and don't you need a congressperson? I was like, yeah, I don't know how to. Clubhouse was like, hey, Clubhouse, yeah, thanks, man. District played golf on that golf course.
Oh, the clubhouse, right?
The clubhouse, yeah, thanks, man. So then the manager, that so happened that the congressperson for our district played golf on that golf course.
Oh, the clubhouse, right?
Those things called like a
diner.
Yeah,
like a diner.
Like
they don't even have many.
Like a restaurant at a golf club.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that like a golf club protect their country and write about American freedom, but it's totally different when you got 200 people in the state trying to get 2 spots from one senator, and that's where I talk about why they would sacrifice their life to protect their country and write about American freedom. Anybody can write a report. Anybody can write an essay. Get sponsorship from a congressperson or a senator.
The pilot.
Yeah, so to get into the Air Force Academy, I had to go through like a physical exam. My grades had to be assessed. I had to get sponsorship from a congressperson or a senator.
Really?
Yeah, so that's really where things got kind of hinky for me, because anybody can write a report. Anybody can write an essay. Anybody can talk about, why they would sacrifice their life to protect their country and write about American freedom. But it's totally different when you got, 200 people in the state trying to get 2 spots from one senator. And that's where I found myself. So I got lucky, man. I was a busboy in a golf, like a golf club, not a cafe. What are those things called? Like a
diner.
Yeah,
like a diner.
Like
they don't even have many.
Like a restaurant at a golf. Applying to the military academies: West Point, Naval Academy, Coast Guard Academy, Air Force Academy, and then Air Force Academy got back to me, and that was when I was like, "Yep, let's go do this." Made the decision. Cool. And I didn't realize how positive affirmative action was on my side at the time, because it was 1996 or whatever. Realize how positive affirmative action was on my side at the time, because it was 1996 or whatever, whenever I made the decision. Affirmative action was on my side at the time, because it was 1996 or whatever, whenever I made the decision.
Okay, so that was the clip right there. So I found it. So he was just saying it was like 1996, and so he didn't understand how affirmative action was, on his side at the time. And like I said, how do you know, right, that you were in affirmative action hire, right? And I've heard him say this on a couple of podcasts, and that's the hard thing about keeping track of all the different clips and stuff, right? But nobody tells you that you're the beneficiary of affirmative action. You know what I'm saying? So you're just left wondering, right? But hypothetically, what if you're the most qualified person there? Nobody's telling nobody. It would be almost kind of like illegal to tell a person that they were, in a weird way. Like you can't just say, "Oh, you're an African American, you're an Hispanic American, you're this or that, and we want you," right? Affirmative, but he almost, I hate to say it, I feel like he's almost kind of taken on a very conservative white person view of how affirmative action works, in which they think that it's all about quotas, right? Like you're purposely finding people of color and lowering standards in order to let them in. When in certain cases, affirmative action is kind of subjective, right? It could be a lot of different things. It could be just we want to make more active efforts to recruit, but not necessarily hire. Because at the end of the day, you have to be qualified for positions, right? It's kind of like a light, right? The lamp light has been pointed so much on this community that we forgot to shine it over here. So we're just gonna tilt it a little bit here so that that entire community that was in the shadows, traditionally speaking, has visibility. That could be an affirmative action policy. It's not always about hard recruiting people because of the color of their skin or their gender or anything like that. But in certain cases, it very well could be, but it's hard to know, hard to gauge. In other words, affirmative action is not an exact science. Um, but even if it were an exact science, right? And let's just say that his framing understanding of how affirmative action works, which is very interesting because my father actually uh, served in the Federal Department of Labor after he got out the military, in which he would do a lot of investigations into civil rights abuses and everything like that, right? So it's very interesting. It's like, how does he not know that he's the most qualified person there? Sure, being a person of color may have, optically speaking, could have played a role, but not necessarily when it came to, let's just say, if there's a formula, played a role, right? The hard numbers, the empirical, his GPA, all the things he's done, accomplished, right? The fact that when they do a background check, he doesn't show up, so he has no negative weighted scale factor or whatever, right? So it's like, and that's what I'm saying. I feel like this is just something that some people of color have adopted in undermining your own accomplishments in order to placate the larger white society. When really sometimes you may literally be the most qualified person there. And not only, right? So, and then if you want to talk about statistics, you can just say, statistically speaking, being a person of Hispanic and or African American descent, when it comes to levels of poverty, education, right? The fact that, you've made it to these roles doesn't necessarily mean that you needed a crutch. It can actually mean you've had to triumph more than what the white person who grew up in suburbia in a two-parent household with two college educations and inheritance money and all the generational wealth, and they don't even realize this about themselves, have, right? So, and that's all. I mean, it's just interesting. I think to me it was more so of like I notice I noticed this. Well, put it this way, right? The vast majority of people interviewing or he's doing interviews with are white, right? Nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to hate on it, right? But let's just be real. These spaces are majority white. The conspiracy theory stuff, space white. UFC space white. Special forces stuff, majority white. The comedian sphere, majority white. The YouTube is kind of more beneficial to, the majority. It's just how it is, right? And they have group behaviors just like everybody else. You know what I'm saying? It's like peer pressure, following in, fitting in, right? So even though people are subjective individually, sometimes we comply with what our notion of like objective truths are. Um, but regardless, right? I'm just going off, but it's just interesting. I just noticed that the vast majority of people who interview him are white, but he always kind of inserts, not always, but sometimes inserts this affirmative action claim. But it's just like, how do you know? Like nobody's notifies you that you're the affirmative action hire. You know what I'm saying? This is why you're here, right? But and that's one of the reasons why affirmative action was kind of damaging, is because it was more actually subjective than what people came to believe, and conservatives captured its definition and pushed this unilateral definition amongst the public, in which both sides believe. So you have a lot of people who are people of color who are very well deserving to be in these spots, feeling almost a little depressed because they think that either A, maybe I got it because of affirmative action, or B, nobody believes I'm here because I'm the affirmative action hire. And it can also be damaged. You know what I'm saying? It was just a damaging thing, right? And what's interesting is that after the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action, there was the big rush to do DEI, right? Which wasn't affirmative action, right? DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, was more so just like even more subjective, just kind of these corporate, or not even corporate, it was just institutional programs, policies to kind of just make people feel included. I would argue in the wake of the dismantlement of affirmative action, which was more a little, let's just say, more systemic and bureaucratic in how it was applied, or its mentality. DEI was more so just like a vision statement without fangs. To just say, even though affirmative action is not around, we still foster diversity. We still want, people who may speak a couple languages to come to our business. And we want to make them feel included and not just being talked down to by, let's just be real, majority white, male, straight bosses. Some who may be totally drinking the MAGA Kool-Aid and won't admit that, but they have their own predispositions and ways of potentially possibly discriminating against a person but nobody would believe that, right? Because nobody and this is how systemic power accrues. It's innocuous, right? It gaslights. No, we don't have power, we don't have extra say, or whatnot. Or it tries to maintain its supremacy by arguing that it has a sense of innate sort of superiority over everybody else. So this is just the natural order, right? It's constantly defending this notion of this is just the natural order because we are superior. Or if there are, let's just say, good old boy type politics going on, they'll gaslight you and saying that it just doesn't exist and you're the ones being crazy and bringing up race or whatnot. And this is why you need oversight, because the human species is so subjective and relative that you do have bad actors potentially on both sides. And you need to have, an arbiter, some sort of regulatory body to ensure that nobody's being discriminated against in either which direction. But it's interest but it's kind of hard to say that white men, for example, are being discriminated against when they're still vastly the majority of people in this country. You know what I'm saying? And so, but regardless, to kind of end this up about Andrew and whatnot, it's just interesting that he would undercut himself when really, like I said, he could have been the most qualified person there. He could have been the most deserving person to have been accepted to the academy. But he's adopted this sort of, and this is some of the trauma that I think affects a lot of people of color in this country. You know what I'm saying? We accept their narrative of us. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I'm not trying to be like anti-white or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? If you like rock music, if you talk a certain way, I don't care. Be you. Do what you want to do. Express yourself the way you want to express yourself. But we sometimes adopt their view of us, right? And it creates this existential sort of dilemma of to be or not to be, right? And you're kind of caught up in the middle. And ultimately, you can only define yourself as a person, not the people who look like you, not the people who don't look like you. Only you can define yourself, right? But I when I see sometimes and hear Andrew speak, right, and I don't necessarily know if he likes to be psychoanalyzed. He'll psychoanalyze everybody else and try to understand human nature, and he has this very pessimistic view of the world, right? I think because of experiences that happened to him in his childhood or things that happened to him as he kind of tested these objective principles in which he found out that he was like failed eventually. Like for example, he has a story about how he was at the Air Force Academy prep school or something, and he actually snitched on some people, right? Because that was, according to the rules, the right thing to do. But then again, that socially speaking, outside of the text and regulations, that wasn't the right thing to do. And he was socially ostracized as a result of that for his Air Force Academy stay, right? So it's like things like that, like these kind of events where he's kind of testing whether or not these objective truths are as valid as they are. And then once through so many experiences, you're let down so much that you take on this very nihilistic, pessimistic viewpoint of just kind of F authority, F the system. And I think but he even admits to having a problem with authority himself too. So sometimes you hear contradictory things, right? It's like it's almost like he wants to follow the rules. The rules on paper you follow, right? But if he has to just say like a policy issue with like his superior, right? Or an idea that he feels like, needs to happen and that doesn't happen. He'll resist and feel like, he needs to kind of go against the system or something. So it's like this weird thing of like kind of maintaining the system, but then trying to move the needle forward. But if people above him get in the way of moving the needle in the way he seems fit, then he kind of just throws his hands up and says, "Screw the system! I'm going to smash it down." And that might be a gross oversimplification of what I'm saying as well, which I can admit. But he's just an interesting guy, nonetheless. But I don't want this video to go too far. But I kind of wanted this to just kind of sit around the affirmative action thing, and I think that he's undercutting himself. I don't know if he has verifiable proof in his claim in which he was an affirmative action hire. Many people of color in these spaces, as we're seeing right now, particularly under the Donald Trump administration, and how they're pushing this notion that diversity just equals ineptitude, which is almost a very coded racist, white supremacist talking point. It's just kind of unfortunate that Andrew Bustamante would kind of, particularly with his emphasis for being kind of a devil's advocate when it suits him, right, would push this unless he has, I hate to say it, internalized trauma about being a minority in a majority white society in which he feels he needs to self depreciate to a certain extent in order to gain an audience with the larger white majority. When really, like I said, he could have been the most qualified person to have been in these spaces. So I'm just going to end it right there. Thank you and bye.